I have the pleasure now of introducing Ted Wayman, our keynote speaker. Ted is an Emmy Award-winning journalist with WCVB Channel 5. He's covered major stories in the Boston area for over 2 decades, including the September 11th attacks, the hunt for Whitey Bulger, and many Boston sport teams' championships in recent years. In June of this year, Ted decided to speak publicly about his recovery journey for the first time. It's really our pleasure, and we're so grateful that Ted Wayman is here. But before we hear from him, we have a short video about his choice and journey.
Hello, Ted Wayman.
Hi, Maria Stefanos.
It's great to see you.
Nice to be with you.
And we've known each other a long, long time. And you're here for an important reason. There's something that you want to share with people. Something I had no idea. Ted, what's the secret that you'd like to share?
I had problems with drugs and alcohol. And I think a lot of people who suffer from substance abuse, it's a secret. They keep the secret from family, friends, employers. I drank and drugged differently than my peers through college, through young professional, and I hit a wall.
Ted hit that wall and then moved to this house in Watertown. It was a decision that changed his life.
My life changed. I used to think it was the worst day of my life, but it turned out to be the best day of my life. The day I chose to get sober, and I just happened to be living here. And
with some dear friends?
Some guys I grew up with, moved into their place, and for the first couple of years, it was a haven for me because I was able to stay clean and sober. I was able to work, but I was really able to kind of get on my feet and have that early sobriety to build upon. And without a haven like this, I don't think I could have done it with the support of friends and family.
The years before Ted got help were raw and real. All of that drinking and all of those drugs put him $30,000 in debt while working as a television reporter.
It was bad. Not a lot of people knew, but I had financial troubles from it. I had personal problems from it. I did not want professional problems, and I knew that either I was going to have a DUI or I was going to get in a jam with police because of my drinking and drugging, and I was going to lose a job. And I was looking at a lot of things. I was still single. I wasn't married. I didn't have any kids, but I was empty. I was a broken 28-year-old kid, and I knew I had to do something about it. I had my last beer here in the fall of 1990. And I had it with a good friend of mine who was supportive of me, but it turns out he also suffered from alcoholism, and he died several years later.
You know, it's funny when we've been talking and you're so open and you share so many things, and then I see your eyes go somewhere else at the end of your sentence, and I wonder where you go.
I'm lucky.
That's exactly what it seems.
Because not everybody gets sober and not everybody stays sober.
And the past couple of years have added a whole new complicated layer.
You said that things absolutely took a turn during the pandemic for a lot of people.
Absolutely. I think during the pandemic, it isolated so many of us. And isolation is bad for somebody who has a substance abuse problem. You tend to be alone, drinking more, drugging more, and I saw it because I work with a lot of people in recovery, and they saw the numbers of people that needed to help skyrocket. And that's why I'm reaching out to others to know that there is hope for recovery, that if I can get clean and sober, anybody can get clean and sober, because there's a lot of recovery resources out there for people, and it changes lives.
You're very grateful.
Absolutely, because there's a saying too in recovery, if I'm going to keep my recovery, I've got to give it away, which means I got to extend my hand, or at least be an ear to someone, because I can't hold on this thing by myself. I've got to either extend myself to somebody who's looking for recovery, whether it's a family, friend. There's so many resources out there, and I've seen what happens to people when they are in recovery. It changes their life, and sometimes I look in a mirror because I know it changed my life.
Can I extend my hand to you and say I'm so glad that you shared that with me, too?
Thanks, Maria.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ted Wayman. I'm an alcoholic. Nice to be with you guys here at MRC. Thank you for having me. I think this is such an important topic. As you saw in the story, I think the pandemic changed things for so many people on so many levels, and people who suffer from alcoholism, addiction, substance use disorder. We had a lot of time to be isolated. And as a reporter, I was kind of everywhere during the pandemic, and I really saw the problems of substance use disorder in every facet of life that I saw as a reporter. And I give great credit to WCVB, who said I'd kind of brought it to their attention. And my news director, Margaret Cronin, said, "Ted, would you tell your story?" And I thought, after almost 32 years of continuous sobriety, who was I hiding from? Nobody. And that's why I certainly give MRC great credit for including me today, because I think this is a good topic for not only employers, but employees as well. I won't speak too long, but as an alcoholic, long before I ever drank or drugged, there's often a saying that I heard early on that I, in recovery, that I identified it. I was always looking for it, and it comes in many different forms. And that was long before I ever drank or drugged. And for early as a kid, for me, it was probably sugar or candy. And then it became friends or clothes or cars or jobs or girls. I first picked up alcohol when I was probably 13 or 14 years old, like most adolescents. But I did not have that kind of white light experience. It wasn't like, oh, this was the eternal feeling that I was looking for all my life. But it did grow on me. And in that kind of search for looking for it, that continued with drugs and alcohol. And part of that is that often I've found in my recovery that it doesn't matter what family you grew up in, what education you had, what neighborhood you lived in, who your friends were. If you have substance use disorder, eventually it will grab you by the throat. And as you saw in the piece, I was a 28-year-old guy, would have thought that I had everything to live for. I had everything in the world for me, but what was owning me was my drug and alcohol problem. And as I've learned in recovery, either three things happen to someone who has substance use disorder. You either end up in jail, you end up in an institution, or you end up dead. And I was looking at those three things, and those three things hadn't happened to me, but I realized something was significantly wrong, and then I needed to get clean and sober. Kind of fast forward, I now realize that getting clean and sober was the greatest gift ever given to me. I knew nobody in recovery. I knew nothing about recovery. But finally, I picked up the phone and asked for help. And I got that help on October 19th, 1990. And as I said, it was probably the greatest day of my life, because it has given me everything in my life. As you saw in the story, later on in recovery, I got married. I have children. I've been a good employee since the day that I got clean and sober, because I was no longer hiding that secret. I worked at TV stations who probably could have lost their licenses knowing that one of their employees was on the air using alcohol and drugs. I will be forever grateful that did not happen, that I was able to stay employed. But I know if I had continued drinking and drugging, I would have not stayed employed. And that's why I continue to see that recovery is the greatest thing that ever happened to me. Being clean and sober is something that I have to work on a daily basis. And I'm incredibly grateful to my employer at WCVB for giving me the job that I have today, but also this specific platform to talk to not only fellow employees, but also employers. I know what you guys are doing today with MRC is really an opportunity to talk to, hiring managers, HR directors, basically to reduce the stigma of hiring people in recovery. I often say in my recovery is that people that I know and love in recovery are the brightest, smartest, most productive people I know. Also the funniest people I know, because they're fully engaged in their life. I'd also spoke to some of my friends over at MGH who work in the Recovery Works Group, and we were talking about the employer cost calculator. And I know a lot of HR people out there and hiring managers understand that if you have an employee who is not clean and sober, the loss that when it comes to millions of dollars lost in time off, healthcare cost, what it does for a corporation or a business organization, having someone who is in recovery, and we heard Joe Davis speak about it, is the productivity level skyrockets. You're not using sick days. Sometimes you're not using all your vacation time. That you are that valued and gainfully employed employee that often I said, if if I was a hiring manager, I would seek people in recovery because I know that I was given a second chance at life. And it makes you look at life very differently, not only from a personal perspective, but also from a professional perspective, that these guys have, they're giving me a shot to work in something that I love. I'm going to go through a wall for them if I can. So I say that to potential hiring managers or HR directors, that you really will reduce the stigma of hiring people in recovery. Now, that wasn't always the case. Joe spoke to that eloquently as well, is that when I got sober in the fall of 1990, I was not going to carry the flag of recovery through my newsroom, because I saw what had happened when people went away to detoxes, recovery places. People would talk behind about their back, primarily out of ignorance, because they didn't understand substance use disorder. But often what I find today is very much like cancer. I often speak to schools as well, is that everybody, like cancer, everybody likely knows someone who's battling substance use disorder. It might be a neighbor, a friend, an employee, an employer, the guy across the street, the guy you know at the store, and likely probably someone within your own family. They often talk about statistics is that pretty much maybe 10% of the workforce, going back to that employer cost calculator, 10% of the workforce likely suffers from substance use disorder. They didn't ask for it, but it is a disease, and they have it. And that often spreads to maybe, if you look at the cost calculator, up to 25%, because it affects family and friends. It is a disease, and if it's not addressed, it continues to eat into our society. So kind of on that note of hiring people in recovery, as I said, the most productive people I know are in recovery. And if you don't have a substance use disorder, you don't have to worry about that. You probably are a good employee or a good employer. But so many people suffer from this disease of substance use disorder. And kind of circling back to the way I started this discussion, is that I have seen it in the pandemic, and this problem is not going away. This past week, 2 people I know, I went to their wakes. Someone who died of an overdose and someone who died of a brain bleed from excessive drinking. And those are 2 wakes that are 2 different ages, a 38-year-old kid and a person my age, around 55 or 60 years old. I often subscribe that it doesn't matter whether you smoke it, snort it, drink it, shoot it, eat it. If you have to medicate through drugs and alcohol, you qualify. And those are 2 guys that I knew pretty well. They're no longer with us. And it saddens me that they could not get recovery, but there are a lot of recovery sources out there. I'll kind of, before we get to maybe a question period, is that I often find that the disease of alcoholism, addiction, or substance use disorder are the 3 M's. If you are someone in recovery, you understand this, that it when you first drink a drug, it turns out to be it's magical. And then down the road, it becomes medicine. It becomes a medication that you need to take every day. And the third, it's misery. And that's why I often talk in my recovery groups, is that I don't ever want to get sober again. Getting clean and sober was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. But again, it is the best thing that has ever happened to me, that I had that opportunity. Not everybody gets that opportunity. There's a saying in recovery that, not everybody gets sober, not everybody stays sober. But for me, I feel incredibly blessed. And I feel incredibly blessed to be with you guys, to be able to put a face to recovery, because there's a lot of great people in recovery that need you as employers. And I urge those hiring managers, those HR people, that to give that person in recovery a second chance. Now, not everybody is going to be as public as I am, because I work in a pretty public position. But I feel that I can give a face to recovery, that there are wonderful employees out there to hire. And if you do find out they're in recovery, I would urge you to take a second, third, and closer look at that person, because I think that person brings to the table something that an ordinary employee, and it's no fault of their own, that they don't. Often people in recovery feel like they get a second chance in life, and that's not a bad employee to hire. So again, thank you, MRC, for having me today. I'm open to any questions. And also, finally, I think that, and you can do it offline, if there's people in this audience that need treatment or need help or have questions, I'm easily found on social media. And if I can help you anywhere along the way, I'd be happy to. Again, my name is Ted Wayman, and I'm an alcoholic. And I'm very happy to be here with you today. Thank you for having me.
Ted, wow. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. That was really amazing. And we appreciate your honesty, your integrity, and your inspiration. I'm sort of have to take a deep breath after just listening to it to think about the questions. We do have one, as you mentioned, that thankfully the world has evolved quite a bit since you first got into recovery, but as you noted, there's still stigma, and I'm editorializing here, thanks to people like you being public about this. We're reducing stigma as in this exact moment. What advice would you give someone now who's in recovery about how much they should share about their recovery journey?
I think that it's still, Fran, that it's still touchy for some people. I think that the world really, it's one of the good things that have come out of the pandemic is that people are much more open when it comes to this specific topic. But I think that you also should balance with that either someone at work that you think that you're going to tell that may not have the same open-mindedness or wanting to go to that extra length. I think you have to be smart about who you tell. Because as I said, in prior experience, I've seen that hurt people. But if you would go to somebody in HR, they're a little bit more educated about certainly the law and about how people with substance use disorders should be received by employers, is that maybe starting there to say, then that final interview, is there anything else maybe you want to talk to me or let me know about your person, your background, to say, it might be helpful to know that I'm in recovery. Because I think people, if they're open-minded, will look at that as a huge asset to say, boy, I'd like to hire this person who's in recovery about having to worry about someone who has a substance use disorder problem and have not confronted that. From a business perspective, there's no choice who I would hire, because all those sick days and that time lost and that productivity lost by someone who hasn't decided to face up to that substance use disorder issue. But I think you have to be a little cautious about who you tell. I think in your production, people will know who that person is in recovery because they are going that extra mile. They're not taking those sick days. They're probably the best employee that they could hire. So I would just, you're not carrying the flag, but I think you need to be cautious on who you tell when talking to a potential employer.
That makes sense. And I would add, I know in working with MRC that, when they're trying to place people with disabilities of any kind, that they're not disclosing that to an employer. That's, they're talking about someone who's been trained and qualified and fully vetted. That's not something that MRC would ever do. It's not their story to tell. Just wanted to clarify that for listeners.
Fran, one anecdotal story. I have a good friend who has 3 or 4 restaurants on the West Coast. I used to live in Los Angeles back in the day, and he only hires people in recovery because he understands the cost savings, the time savings, and it almost creates like a team bond with people in recovery. Now, I don't know if that's totally right that he only hires people in recovery, but that's really the number one prerequisite when hiring people on his staff. And it's turned out for him to be a total benefit.
Yeah, and what a great supportive environment for all of those employees. Yeah. Another question, every job has its stresses and deadlines and times when you have to put on a command performance. Obviously, broadcast journalism seems to be the definition of those things. When you look back on your own experience, when you started back in work, or maybe you were in work the entire time as you were getting into recovery, what did help or could have helped you in terms of your workplace experience?
When I first got clean and sober, Fran, and I was a single guy then, all I could really do was work, 8, 10, 12 hours a day, and also go to recovery meetings. That was a huge help to me because I said in the story, it created that foundation of sobriety that helped me build upon that. I think it's that focus that you kind of need. Now, not everybody is, we all get clean and sober at different phases of our lives. Sometimes you might have little kids, but keeping that recovery at the top of the list, everything else will fall into place. And I work with a lot of young people in recovery that if sobriety is number one, whether it's family, work, everything has to be below that. And those things will all fall into the correct place. But as long as sobriety and recovery is number one, I promise everything else will fall in where it should.
That's great. And you've already talked a lot about the strengths you've seen with people in recovery. I'm wondering if you've just alluded to some of the groups you've worked with. What is your involvement? What are you doing, obviously outside of work in this area? Is that through meetings or volunteer work?
Maybe a little bit of both. I realize that I need to be in the middle of the big bed of recovery. So I'm very active with my recovery meetings. I work with a lot of guys who are getting clean and sober, staying clean and sober. Just having that personal connection with people in recovery helps me probably much more than I can help them. One of my home groups, and I give credit to, there's a school in the Boston area that requires all of its seniors to go to one recovery meeting. So they're at least exposed to it. And I think it was a great idea from the administration, someone who understands recovery. And whether these kids, and they're all, they're 18-year-old seniors, whether they will ever have a substance use disorder, know anybody who will have one, at least that seed will be planted that either they'll have sympathy for someone, they'll understand the disease of addiction and alcoholism a little bit better. But it's all those little ties that connect me to keep me in my recovery because, I didn't cause it, but I'm never going to be cured from my substance use disorder. I will always have that. But as long as I stay clean and sober, that's really kind of the best way to do it. And staying close in the recovery process, just first of all, it maintains my sobriety. But, sometimes I go back to that. Certainly the preamble of Alcoholics Anonymous is to stay sober and help another alcoholic or addict. But I like to extend it to like another human being. If I stay clean and sober and I can help another human being, it really doesn't get any better for me than that. But also at the end of the day, it helps me stay clean and sober. And going back to what I said, it's the best thing ever happened to me. Why would I ever want to get away from that?
Thank you. And we do have one more question. What advice do you have for employers considering hiring people in recovery? I know these are all bordering or, around the same topic, but if you were an employer considering this, what advice?
Give that person a chance. If they were honest enough to tell you that they're in recovery, I think that's already a badge of honor for them, that they have the guts to do that. But then to take a closer look and to really seriously, boy, is this a person that I want on my staff? I would say 10 out of 10 times the answer is yes. Especially, maybe they don't have 30 days. Maybe they have a little bit more recovery than that, but they're building upon it and they're already seeing how recovery is changing their life. If I was an employer, I probably would subscribe more to my friend side, that I would only hire people in recovery because I know from where they're coming from is that they have a second chance in life. They want to improve upon that. And as an employer, I don't think you're going to get a better employee than that.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Fran.
Thanks, Ted. We're going to let you go back to your very busy day. We do have some questions up for MRC, and maybe Molly or others can come on camera to answer some of them. We've answered some of them here directly in the chat, but I think it might be helpful to get some of them answered live as well. Can you share a little bit more about the employment team that works in the MRC offices, and how do they work with employers? What does it look like?
Absolutely. I'll be happy to do that. I will say Bill is going to be getting into this more, this later in the day, I think right before lunch, you'll get to Bill's comments, but we are a statewide job placement team. So we have representatives, job placement specialists and employment services specialists across the Commonwealth. And as I mentioned in my comments, we have a dual customer approach, meaning we work with individuals with disabilities and also employers. So I don't know, Bill, I don't want to take too much of your thunder away from this afternoon. So do you want to take this?
No, I'm happy to have you help me do my presentation, make it a lot easier. So go for it, Molly. No, you make my life easier, Molly.
So when we work with employers, we really try to get to know them and what their needs are. So like we do the people that we work with. We also work with them on, we didn't mention this earlier, but tax credits, like the work opportunity tax credit and the disability employment tax credit. So credits like that, we work with employers on as well. Other incentives to get them to be open, to working with the MRC and working specifically with individuals in recovery. So we have a very dynamic team, like I said, across the state, and growing by the day. So we definitely work together to work with both the employers and the individuals that we serve.
Yeah, and so it also, I'm excited to announce, because we're going to repeat it again so that you can all take advantage of that. Massachusetts now has its own disability employment tax credit. Given the leadership of Commissioner Wolf, we're able to now offer not only the WOTC work opportunity tax credit, but in Massachusetts, it's now launched for the disability employment tax credits, because you get 2 tax credits now. What a great benefit in getting, more importantly, the highly skilled individual. You're getting 2 tax credits out of it too. Who would have thought?
And we did have a question, and Bill, you may have some thoughts about this. What about when folks are in a situation, folks in recovery who may want to work in various medical positions, nursing, registered nurse, certified nursing assistants, PAs, you have it. A lot of times, if depending on someone's background, that may be challenging if they have had some kind of drug or alcohol problem. And what does MRC do with folks like that who might be interested in working in medical fields, or really, any field where there may be some either a legal issue, the Corey criminal background, that kind of thing?
Sure. No, I think Molly and both Joe alluded to this, and I see Joe popping back up because it's really unique to the individual. And one of the things about the MRC, again, as Joe really eloquently described, it's really given the opportunity and offering that possibility of purpose. So let's explore that together. So it's really with the individual counseling and guidance they get from the vocational rehabilitation counselor and all the other subject matter experts, kind of like an integrated resource team within the community. And we reach out to employers and we get their purpose of how they would work with us to identify the skills and abilities, and really get into opportunities to take a look at that and how that would blend well into this specific organization. It really depends on the individual and the organization, and that's where our team comes together, works with the area directors and all the other individuals, vocational rehabilitation counselors. And we'll actually bring in employers. You'll hear me talk about our advisory boards, giving us guidance to specific topics like that. So we have real-time information so that we can inform that decision when counselors are developing that individual plan for employment. Joe?
Thank you, Bill. As Bill stated a little while ago, it is unique to each individual. However, there are ways that a person's story or past infractions with the law or anything that may have run afoul, and using the example of a nurse who's trying to get back into the workplace. They have their credentialing or they're trying to have their license renewed. It's a very laborious process, but I have walked through that several times with individuals that I've worked with over the years. And what the nursing boards and a lot of credentialing authorities, what they're looking for is some shred of information that would help them to make some informed choices about taking someone back. So when you partner with the MRC, MRC stands for Massachusetts Rehabilitation Commission. The focus is on the rehabilitation. And so when consumers come to us to work with them, if they have had a past history of working and they've had they've been gainfully employed in a particular job for a sustained period of time, that's a focal point of the rehabilitation process. What that means is before the nursing board will certify them again, they have to demonstrate something that would allow them, the licensing authority, to feel, you know what, they've taken all of these classes over again. They've sat for the exam again. They have a letter from their rehabilitation counselor to say they've engaged in a process with us. They've been had a long and sustained period of sobriety under their belt. If they have a sponsor, we might ask the sponsor to write a letter in support of them. And so you put together a package of information and you present it. Some people, depending on what their job focus is, we may even have to try to reach out to get them bonded in order to perform that job again, because the fallout from their time when they weren't on the road of recovery, it's just littered with in tatters for a whole lot of different reasons. But that's one of the things that a dedicated vocational rehabilitation counselor can help someone out with. So it does take a lot of time. It's not a quick fix, but I have seen people have their license restored. I've seen them go back to those professions where, without having the weight of an organization such as the MRC and your recovery community and your sponsor, and maybe even a letter from your pastor or whatever recovery group that you're a part of, you can restore and rehabilitate your life. And that's one component of it. With Corey, it's pretty much the same way. We have resources that we can help a person to have a Corey seal. Some of them, there's like, if it's someone with who is a sex offender, it's very difficult to remediate that. But I have had people who wanted to be a recovery coach and ran into all kinds of blocks in order to get a job in that field. But what we wound up doing was finding them a sorry support group for people who were in recovery. So they got a chance to be a recovery coach and a substance use disorder counselor, but it was a curated employment experience. That's the value of partnering up with the MRC, because there are things that can happen behind the scenes that can buff up and polish up a person so that they are ready to be presented to an employer. And sometimes we have to take the road less traveled, but it's worth it in the long haul. So I just wanted to add that to the conversation.
Yeah. So we do direct placements for across the medical sector. So CNAs, LPNs, RNs. Molly alluded to that. She did her due diligence with identifying the data from our quality assurance team at MRC. So the short answer is yes, we will work. To Joe's point, we work together to ensure that process is filled with the value of the team network within the community and internal to MRC. So we are competitively based employment organization to give that possibility a chance.
Great. And just want to point out a couple of items from the chat. Now I just lost it. John Wheeler mentioned that High Point, which is a treatment center here in Massachusetts, is a CORI, and now I'm blanking on what CORI means, criminal offender record information. It's essentially your criminal record. So people are often concerned about that. And John pointed out that like a lot of substance use disorder treatment programs and recovery programs, that they are CORI friendly. And I know that the work that we're doing with MRC, that's something that we're always trying to think about, placing people who have a criminal record to make sure that they get the job that they are really interested in and trained for.